off leaving and going out and finding a place where you are, you're a beta maybe, but in a group of higher quality men. Being an alpha in a group of losers is like being the largest turd in a pile. It's not really something to be proud of.
Yeah.
And so for men, we need to be proud of the groups we belong to. We need to have nothing to be ashamed of in our groups. And if we're ashamed of the men that we are around, that reflects very badly on us. And we need to either help them be better men, if that's possible. If
Mm.
it's not, find a better group.
Mm. Yep. Well said. So I'll just give a rundown of this higher resolution iteration of the socio-sexual hierarchy, very briefly referring to my thumbnail that I made here. Now, I chose characters from the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, largely because I'm very familiar with it. I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan, and I think it's the epitome of the Batman franchise, but also because across those three movies, Christopher Nolan and Jonathan Nolan did a really good job of demonstrating archetypes, demonstrating these figures in character form. So on the far left, we have Bane, and I've selected him as the alpha. Now, he's not necessarily the easiest choice to put in the alpha box because he's a villain, and because we don't get to see the good qualities of the alpha in him. But what we do see undeniably is the strength, the physicality, and the leadership, where the men around him absolutely follow him, want to be him, fear him to a certain degree, and he is absolutely ferocious in defending his position at the top of the hill. So he is an alpha, but he's the dark side of the alpha. Then we've got
And even in the dark side of the alpha, if you compare how he treated his men to how the Joker treated his men, you're going to see why one is alpha and the other is not.
yes, absolutely. You could even argue that the Joker didn't have any men, and we'll get across to him in a
Yeah,
minute. Although
they were
there were
just
certainly,
disposables.
yeah, that's right. Now, next to him we have John Blake, who, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the third of the trilogy, it turns out that he's Robin. He is the perfect Bravo. Now, we're going to use the term Bravo from here on instead of Beta because of that early iteration and that dichotomy of alpha beta. As you said, it sort of became this alpha good, beta bad, and beta male has become such an insult. But what Vox Day really did in his unpacking of this hierarchy and his coinage of these labels is he identified that the Bravo, the lieutenant, as you put it before, is actually a really, really good position to be in. It's not a bad position at all. You're a trusted right-hand man to the alpha. You're a lieutenant. You're a guy who sticks closely with the strong leader. You're not going to be the strong leader yourself, but you get a lot of the peripheral benefits of being around that strong leader, and there's a trusting, reciprocal relationship with the strong leader. Now, obviously, John Blake is not Bane's Bravo. He's Batman's Bravo, but he's a Bravo nonetheless, and we'll get into the details of each of these as we get further along. Next, we have the Gamma. Now, I've actually totally forgotten the name of this character, but Ben Mendelsohn's character, who is the sniveling, weedy, sleazy, lying, deceiving, arrogant little dickhead who ends up getting his ass kicked. He thinks he's in control, and there's that beautiful scene which has become such a powerful meme of him saying, "But I gave you a small fortune," to Bane, and Bane putting his hand on his shoulder and saying, "Do you feel in control?" And that's a perfect example of the reality of the Gamma versus the Gamma's perception of himself. So the Gamma is a very self-deluded character who almost always thinks he's an alpha, but is not. Again, we'll get into the details of that a bit further along and other examples. Then we've got Jim Gordon.
And the self delusion. I think the self delusion is important. I think it's the only character that is deluded out of these in the hierarchy. The others, they more or less know their place.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now Jim Gordon is next in line, and he's a delta in my estimation, and his deltas are probably the best example of guys who know their place and who function really well. Deltas are the most voluminous in society, and like any hierarchy, it's like this. You've got very few alphas at the top. You've got more bravos. A general needs more lieutenants. We need more lieutenants and generals, but then we've got deltas, and they're the foot soldiers of society. They're the guys who do the grunt work, they do the hard work, they're honest, they're loyal, they just want to be treated with respect. They don't marry the supermodels. They marry the nice girls, and they make families, and there's lots of them. So they're really, really necessary, really valuable guys in society, and you want to have a lot of them in your
I generally
hierarchy.
find they're actually the most functional men.
Yeah.
They're the men that have the simple, calm, quiet life, and they're happy. A
Yes.
lot of the alphas are very unhappy because of the stress of leadership. Even some of the Bravos are unhappy because they couldn't be the alpha sometimes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stress higher up on that hierarchy, and Delta seems to be a nice in the middle. You've got responsibility, you've got people to help you. If things go bad, you have someone to ask for help, and it's a good place to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Unless your wife starts hanging around with alphas, and we'll get to that. And then next in line, we've got, of course, Heath Ledger's Joker, who's an extreme and rare example of an Omega. But Omegas are quite rare, and they're very invisible usually. They don't normally make quite as much of a scene as the Joker did. But when they make a scene, they tend to make a very, very, very bloody scene indeed. Omegas are the guys who don't shower, they don't leave the basement. People generally don't know they exist. They don't get invited to parties. Women are repelled by them if they even notice them at all. They're the guys who are the most dysfunctional in the hierarchy, to the point of disappearing. They're the grey men. And when they snap, which happens from time to time, they tend to go ballistic. These are your school shooter types. And these are the guys who are very, very troubled. And I guess
they're the kind of guys that just want to see the world burn.
they can be. Yeah, they can become that. Otherwise, they're guys who just disappear into oblivion, which is preferable to making the world burn. But, if they can move themselves up into the Delta sphere, they'll be much, much happier guys. And then, of course, we have the hero, the Dark Knight of this particular series. Normally, the Alpha is the hero, but in this case, Batman is a Sigma. He's not an Alpha. He plays the Alpha as Bruce Wayne, but as anyone who knows the characters well knows, that Bruce Wayne is the false persona. Bruce Wayne is the Alpha character that he plays, but Batman is who he truly is, and he's a Sigma. He doesn't want to be part of a hierarchy. He wants to stand alone and do his own thing. And in this case, it's defend Gotham City against crime and evil. So Sigmas often appear to be a lot like Alphas, but they're not really into working in teams. They're not really into being part of hierarchies. Generally, they can be, but they prefer to do things their own way and not really have to answer to anybody else. So they tend to exist outside of the hierarchy. They don't play by the rules that others play by. So that's a brief rundown.
I find with the Sigmas a lot of times it's they're willing to take a lot of responsibility for things, but not responsibility for people.
Yeah,
and that's a big difference between them and the Alphas. They both can have very high levels of responsibility, but one of them it's a very social responsibility, and the other it's very individual responsibility.
That's a great way to put it, and I haven't heard it put that way before. I agree. I think that's a good way to put it, because you do see Sigmas tending to be very, very active in the world and making things happen. Probably the most famous outside of Batman in the movie world, at least, or in literature, is James Bond. He's a really good example of a Sigma, where he has all the capacities of an Alpha, but by God, he does not work well in teams. He does not want to take responsibility for any other people. He just wants to do things his own way and make shit happen, and he makes it happen. So it's like the lonely alpha, the lone wolf, alpha wolf in a way, the Sigma. And I believe there are some other archetypes in the socio-sexual hierarchy, as you said before, where we start off with an overly simple dichotomy of alpha beta, and then we end up with these 6 stages. There are others like lambda that I don't know enough about to comment on, and maybe we can do another episode in the future where we drill down further. But I think that these particular 6 are probably the most common, and most people will fit into one of these boxes pretty well behaviorally. So why don't we jump back to the alphas, and let's talk in a bit more detail. And while you and I discuss it, Noah, I'd love people in the chat